Well, welcome everyone to this webinar series organized by the Alliance for Child Protection and Humanitarian Action. I'm Joanna Wedge and I work as the Implementation and Capacity Development Advisor for the Child Protection Minimum Standards Working Group. The aim of the webinar series is for child protection practitioners to improve their ability to build staff and partners' capacity to implement the minimum standards. Today's session looks at engaging the humanitarian learner. For some of you, it will be a refresher. For others of you, it might be new material. This topic stems from a session that we do on adult learning in each of the Alliance's global TOTs. Unfortunately, not everybody can go to those events, so we wanted to record it so the learning could be shared. Excuse me, my frog in my throat. Unfortunately, not everyone can go to these TOTs, so we wanted to record this session and make sure that the learning could be shared more widely. But we also wanted to unpack the topic and add some new perspectives and stimulate thinking about our adult learners, child protection practitioners who do very difficult and sensitive individual and community level work in complex, dangerous, and often difficult circumstances that are the reality of humanitarian crises. So with no further ado, I would like to introduce our speakers, Anita Shankar and Ilya who co-run the Global Trauma Project. Ilya is a marriage and family therapist who specialized in working with children, families, and communities impacted by trauma for the last 2 decades. She has extensive experience working within various contexts such as child protection, supportive housing, mental health, juvenile justice, and education systems. Anita specializes in using popular education to promote social justice, particularly within the fields of public health, trauma healing, and youth development. She's a former trainer for Red R, which many of you may know. Together, they've developed and used the Trauma-Informed Community Empowerment Framework, or the TICE framework, which is a foundation for supporting frontline local providers to identify and develop culturally relevant healing. Between them, they've worked in Eastern and Western Africa, Asia, and the United States. So welcome, Anita and Ilya.
Thank you. We're happy to be here.
Thank you so much.
It's lovely to have you. We're delighted that you're both presenting this topic during the webinar series. You're joining us from Kenya, I think, where you're both based, yes?
Correct, yes.
And in our preparatory discussions, we covered a lot of ground, and I found it so very interesting, the different approaches you have to the work you do with communities and frontline service providers and staff and so on. So can you start by telling us what people can hope to get out of today's session?
Super. So this is one of the only slides that I'm going to kind of read a little bit, but just because I just want to make sure that we have an idea about what we're going to try to talk about and cover today. And hopefully by the end of the hour, these are the things that you should come away with. So one is to understand more about kind of the adult learning process and how adults learn best. Second is to understand how the learning process can be affected by ongoing stress, or what we'll call compounded stress. We are hoping that people will be able to define and understand terms such as compounded stress, self-regulation, and things having to do with the thinking brain and the survival brain. Next is that we hope that people will be learning about the core elements to focus on when training, mentoring, or supporting teams in humanitarian settings. And also, hopefully by the end, you will have been able to identify a variety of interactive and participatory learning methods to use in different trainings.
And we're fortunate that we're able to build off some of the previous webinars in the series, in particular the case studies webinar and the learning and development strategies webinar. We'll refer to some of those concepts in those previous webinars, which you can, of course, always go back and listen to. So Ilya and I actually met at a training. I am someone who loves to learn and particularly loves in-person trainings. So I was giddy with excitement at the opportunity to attend a 2-day training sponsored by a very well-known international training organization. I was so excited. I arrived early, I had my pen and my paper, and I settled into my chair, which looked something like this. But little did I realize that I would spend those next 2 days stuck to that chair. Although I was interested in the topic, I found the process of the training painful, literally. For 2 days, the presenter read his PowerPoint slides, and there was only one time in the training for about 10 minutes that we were out of the chair. So by the end of the training, my body was sore and my mind was numbed. I was definitely disengaged, which was not ideal. So to put some theory to this experience, my work is heavily influenced by a Brazilian educator named Paulo Freire, who coined the term the banking method. And if these terms are unfamiliar to you, don't worry. We'll try to explain them, and you can always ask questions either now or later. But the banking method is when the teacher is thought to have all the knowledge, the power, and the resources, and the students, they say, are like empty cups. They're just sitting there waiting for the teacher to give some knowledge and experience. And unfortunately, a lot of training methods still use this. But for me, it's not something that works. And so it's important to distinguish in the training that we met at, the content was fine. He really wasn't an expert in the field, but it was the process that I found so painful. So today we're going to be speaking more about the process of how to engage humanitarian learners. So we'll be discussing innovative ways of training that will support learners to understand and actually use the information and skills. So our hope is that you can use these strategies with whatever content you normally train on.
So that being said, we realize there's kind of a mix of people that are on this call, but that a good percentage of you, let's probably about half of you or more, are actually working in I would say it sounds like pretty stressful environments, at least at certain times. So up here on the screen right now, we just have some pictures of some examples of some different kind of strategies or different methods to engage people in training, in just different types of experiences that you might be doing where you're wanting to support people in learning something. So the example that Anita gave with that blue chair where we kind of sat for several days and got stiff and numbed, I think you can see maybe in some of these pictures that people are looking very different from that. So, I mean, people are using, you know, the arts, for example, to share and tell about their own stories. So they're using storytelling, they're getting up, they're playing games, they're moving, and they're engaging with different kinds of materials that really help them to share about their own life experiences and to learn from one another. So this is one of the things that Anita's going to just talk a little bit more about in regards to what adults need to really be able to learn and process information best.
Great. Okay. So the alternative to the banking method, which we spoke about before, is the concept of popular education. And the term popular is coming from of the people, not about being liked. So it's about creating wisdom based on the experiences that people have. So teachers and learners are one and the same. So even when I'm a trainer, I go in very much as a student and believe that I can use my skills and my knowledge to pull out information from the participants there as well. And popular education is also about challenging unjust power structures, which is something I feel very strongly about, that training and education and all sorts of learning opportunities can be revolutionary and promote social justice rather than a hierarchical system. So that's what we're going to be talking about a little bit more today. And an example of the method that we use in popular education is called the popular education spiral. And this is viral. That's in the book called Educating for Change, which is a wonderful book. And fortunately, the full PDF is available online, so we will include that in the follow-up email. But the process we use is to actually start with the experience of the participants. So get people to connect and talk, thereby looking for patterns so people can find commonalities. Once we understand the context, then we add new information and theory and spend a lot of time practicing skills, strategizing, and planning for actions. Because trainings are short-term opportunities, but by using this more in-depth model, the hope is that then people can apply the learning in action.
Great. So we're going to ask you to do a little reflection for a moment. And even though this is a webinar, which is not our usual training style, because we like things to be very interactive, which this is very different from, but we're going to ask you to do a bit of a reflection, and then hopefully we'll at least get a few of you that would be willing to type in some of your comments or ideas, okay? So what I'd like to ask you to do is to think about a time when you attended a training or someplace where you were being taught something, and when you felt that it was boring or it wasn't useful. So think about a time you were at a training and you really felt bored, you were not engaged, you kind of couldn't wait for it to be done with. And I just want you to think for a moment about, why were you bored? What was happening there that made you to not feel really interested and excited and energized? What did the instructor do or not do that made you feel disengaged? And to think about, were you able to remember the things that you learned, and could you then go away and really apply it and utilize it well? Or how was that for you? So first of all, before we go on to the second question, I'd like to see if some people would be willing to just give us just a couple just brief statements about that. Could some of you just type in some comments about, why did you feel bored? What was going on that made the training or the experience kind of disengaging for you? Can we see if we can get any comments? And Joanna, will we see these comments as well, or just you?
I believe it's just me. You might be able to see them under questions. The other option is for people to raise hands. This was in the waiting room for those of you who came online a little bit early. This first question at least was in the waiting room. Maybe you've had a chance to think about it. Would love to have your thoughts. So the first one says, trainings where the trainer is just reading PowerPoints in a full text. Lots and lots of words on the screen.
Yes.
Agreed.
Yes, usually that is very boring, and we often feel like, what was the point? I could have just read these anyway.
Yeah, it's such a common method of training.
And
especially where we live in East Africa. This is, I think, is extremely common, maybe even more, than in the U.S. or some other places. But sorry, go ahead, Joanna.
Yeah, and then Maury added that instructors that read from text, I guess whether it's on the screen or in their notes, they're just reading as opposed to engaging with other people. And then we have another one saying trainings that are not applicable in reality. They're very theory-based, but no practical, useful examples. They're detached from reality.
Mm-hmm. Right. Very good. Yes. So I think part of what we're hearing is that we need things in order to feel engaged and energized. We really need things to feel a bit creative. That there needs to be kind of new information, and that it's brought to us in some kind of creative modality that's not just reading from a text. And also that the things that we're learning are linked to really real life practical experiences. So it's not just some theory floating around, but that it directly ties to our actual experience. Super, thank you so much for those comments. I just would like to ask another part of this, which is for you to think about a learning experience that you had that was really different than that. One that you found to be very engaging and enjoyable. And where you really felt like, wow, I learned so much. This was a fantastic experience. And just to think again for a moment, what were the things that kept you engaged? What was it about the process that made it so enjoyable? And again, if we could just get a few comments from you. I'm guessing it will be some of the things that we've already identified. One being that that maybe the content was really brought to life with real practical, real life examples and experiences. But let's just see if we can get a couple other responses from people about what makes a training or a learning environment really fantastic.
Well, we have one great one here from Juanes, I think it is, saying a charismatic trainer that knows the reality and has a sense of humor.
Oh, yes. Great. Humor.
Fabulous.
Good. So not dry. Somebody that can, yeah, keep people really engaged and laughing and kind of on their toes. That's good, and that's something that I think we'll relate to throughout the training today. Mm-hmm. Any others, Joanna?
Yeah, Maury said that enjoying training with storytelling and practical examples, and then Katie had, if I could just use the inverse of what she wrote, she was talking about language, someone who doesn't use a lot of jargon and complicated things, so it's accessible to us as the attendees.
Great. Thank you. Well, good. Well, hopefully we all, you know, kind of have made note of those things, because sometimes even when we know this or we have these things in mind, it can still sometimes in real life be very difficult to actually engage people or conduct trainings or mentoring or things, to actually conduct the sessions in a manner that is really engaging and pulls from people's real life experiences and keeps things very practical and fun. So one thing, whoops, see here, there we go. One thing that I just wanted to mention a little bit more is, you know, I think most all of you are working in or with humanitarian settings. Some of you might not be based right in or living in an emergency or kind of a crisis situation, but most of you are either in that situation or working with people or communities from abroad who are dealing with a lot of different types of stress. So when we think about kind of the humanitarian settings, we're thinking about environments and situations where there really is a lot of stress. A lot of times there's sometimes a lack of different types of resources. There's multiple priorities that are kind of pulling people in different directions. And especially for those of you that are working in child protection and dealing with children and families who sometimes are in even life-threatening kinds of situations or very insecure or unsafe situations, it really kind of can heighten the sense of urgency and the stress level that not only that the people that you're working with face, but also the stress level within us as workers, right? So it's almost like there's two levels of this kind of like stress that we might deal with. One is the people that we're working with. It could be the community members, or it could be the staff members that we're working with are probably, you know, affected by various levels of stress. And then also we ourselves can get affected by these things as well. And we're going to talk a little bit today about how that stress can affect the learning process. So I just want to talk for a minute about this kind of idea of what we call compounded stress. So if you can see the screen here where there's these pictures of a woman who's carrying a bunch of firewood. Usually I would like to ask you guys for more description and ideas about what you see happening here, but because of this format, I'll just go ahead and talk a bit. So I think, at the beginning, the first image, maybe you can see that, this woman is carrying, a bundle of firewood. And, if we can relate this firewood to kind of just normal stress in our lives, we could think that, stress is just a part of normal life. I mean, pretty much everyone living in the world has some amount of kind of stress or challenges or responsibilities that we have to carry on a daily basis. So, on one hand, that's very normal, and some of that stress can even be positive and can even propel us and forward and motivate us to do things. But then, as we keep moving forward to the right, we see that maybe for this lady, the bundle of firewood increases. So the level of stress that she's carrying, it becomes more and more of a burden, to the point to where by the third image, she's carrying so much and she hasn't been able to remove any, right? So she hasn't removed any and more has been added, and it gets to the point now by the last image to where she actually has collapsed. And it may be that there's just one final little stick, one final little piece of stress that has been put on there. Where I'm from, we use the term kind of the straw that broke the camel's back, where just this one little piece of straw can be the turning point to where now it's too much, it's become too much. And so the point of this, I think, is that we all have a certain level of stress. We all are affected by it. Sometimes it can even motivate us further in a good way. But if these stressful things keep accumulating without us having some way of releasing them or removing them, that it will build up, and we will get to the point of becoming affected. Right? And the other thing related to the stress that I could also mention, in particular because many of you are working in humanitarian settings, sometimes where there is natural disaster or actual different types of insecurities. This could also have to do with lack of food or lack of safe or stable housing or medical care. It could also have to do with conflict and violence, war, or ongoing different types of abuse, gender-based violence or child abuse that may occur. So, so these things are kind of, maybe a certain type of stress, which actually, can become quite traumatic for people. So I want to take us through for a moment to actually think about the effects that these types of stressful or maybe even traumatic experiences could have on our brain. I'm sorry. Let me go back for a moment. So before we talk about the brain. So these different types of experiences can affect us in a number of different ways. Yeah. So if you look at the circle here, at the top of the circle, we have a guy who is really feeling ill. So sometimes this kind of buildup of stress or difficult or painful experiences can start to really have some physical effect on our bodies. So you might notice, stomach aches or back pain or chronic headaches that keep coming. There's a lot of different, physical effects that can happen to our body. If we move around this circle, we see also the picture of the man who's tearful. We can also become affected emotionally. And so, we may feel very up and down emotionally, really excited, and then, really low. We might start feeling, very sad or hopeless or helpless feeling. We also can can start to have some impacts to our thoughts or our mental state. So here there's a guy laying in bed and he's having nightmares in the middle of the night. His mind just kind of keeps replaying some of the things that are happening to him. So even sometimes our thinking or our thought process can become a bit altered. The next thing could also have to do with our behaviors, where some actions or behaviors we might start to even behave differently, and also sometimes our sense of spirituality can also become affected. And lastly, we also might talk about our relationships. So even where we are engaging with other people differently, or detaching, or feeling mistrustful or angry towards people. So our relationships can also start to change. So I just want to speak briefly about the brain, because when we experience stress, or especially when we feel any kind of threat, it actually has an effect on the way that our brain works. So typically when we experience some kind of threat, it activates this part of our brain. You'll see that little red thing come up there. It activates this part of our brain, which is called the limbic system, but we like to call it the survival brain. And the survival brain will put us into kind of a fight, flight, or freeze kind of response. We call these the survival responses. So you might notice that you feel like really like escaping or getting out of a situation, or you just kind of freeze up and kind of shut down, or go blank or numb. It might be that you start to feel really frustrated or irritated, and maybe you even become a little bit aggressive towards someone. So it doesn't always have to be extreme, meaning that you're punching someone. It can also have to do with this kind of irritability and these things as well. So an interesting thing that happens is that when our survival brain gets activated, it actually does something to the green part of our brain, which is the front part of our brain up there, which is our thinking brain. And what happens is that when our survival brain gets activated, our thinking brain actually starts to shut down. This is called our prefrontal cortex. And our thinking brain is actually in charge of things like rational thought, decision making, planning, longer term kind of strategizing and goal setting. So all of the things that are really important for, probably for doing a good job at work and for being creative and innovating and being kind of productive and thinking ahead, those things kind of start to shut down when our survival brain is activated due to higher levels of stress or difficult kinds of experiences. The blue arrow on here is also kind of showing that our survival brain also sets off the stress hormones throughout our body. These are things like adrenaline and cortisol, and these stress hormones, actually have an effect on us physically and on our brain functioning. So the final part that I was saying was just relating what happens to our brain to our ability to learn and to take in information and to process that information and to do things with it, right? So basically, when we become more stressed or we have a lot of challenges that we're dealing with, again, that survival brain starts to activate more and more. And as it does, our thinking brain kind of starts to shut down more and more. So that's really important, I think, for any of us that are working especially working in humanitarian settings and working with things having to deal with insecurity and abuse like we do in child protection, right? So it can affect us, again, as staff members, and our ability to think clearly and slow down and make decisions. It also can affect our coworkers and colleagues, and also the kids and families that we're working with. Yeah. So one of the things that happens as we get more stressed is that we start to, the technical term that we call this is we start to dysregulate. And if you see this picture of what is supposed to be kind of a thermometer on here, we usually use a thermometer to measure body temperature, yeah? But in this case, we're going to use the thermometer to talk about our emotional state, like how intense our emotions are, and our energy level. So sometimes when we're dealing with a lot of stress, we might start to go higher and higher, maybe too high, kind of up into that red zone, where my emotions start to get more intense. Instead of just being kind of frustrated or irritable, I start to overreact or get more angry or start to lash out at people, perhaps. And likewise, this can also happen where we start to go too low, down into the blue zone, where maybe I start to just shut down or disengage, or I start to not really care about things anymore, or maybe feel more helpless, like there's nothing I can really do, and nothing I'm doing is making an impact. What's the point of this? And we just become overwhelmed. So when we're in the green zone, it's like that front part of our brain, like our thinking brain, is really able to be in charge. We might be having stress, we might be having some difficulties, we might even be feeling angry or sad about something, but we're able to manage it pretty well, right? Our thinking brain is still engaged, and we can think about how we can best deal with the situation. But again, when things get to be a bit more difficult and the stress starts to kind of take over, that's where our thinking brain might start to shut down more. We start to kind of go out of the green zone and up into the red or down into the blue. Yeah. So we call this, the word on the screen is called regulation. So when we are well regulated, it means that we're in that green zone, right? We're kind of balanced and our thinking brain is operating well. So one of the things that we need to do, especially if we're living or working in high stress situations, is that we need to pay close attention to our own kind of thermometer, right? Our own regulation. Am I still in the green, at a green level? Or am I starting to go up into the red or down into the blue? And you know, you could think for a moment to yourself about what are your signs? What are your personal signs or signals that tell you, oh, I'm starting to go up into the red, or I'm going down into the blue. Sometimes we pay good attention to ourselves and we're very aware of those signs. Sometimes maybe not. I know sometimes when I start to get stressed, it's my little boy who's 5 who will pick up on it really well and will say to me, you know, Mama, are you going to red level? and then I'm like, oh, whoops, even he's noticing it, and I think I need to do something to help myself. So the last thing I'll say about that is that, you know, there's something which we call kind of about self-regulating, which is about having our own kind of skills and strategies to help ourselves get into that green level, the green zone. And sometimes we might need to actually provide some help or support to other people who might be going up into the red or into the blue, and that's called co-regulation, where I might kind of, you know, I'm in the green myself, but Anita's starting to get really stressed and she's getting all flustered and going into the red. And so I may do some things to try and help support her in kind of calming back down and getting into a good place. All right. So one of the things that you may keep in mind, both for yourself personally and also as you're doing your work, especially if you're providing, if you're doing training or mentoring or providing supervision to other people, staff or community members, are there different things that you can build in to the way that you're working that can help to help support people in being in that green zone? So we have some examples on the screen of, doing physical exercises, breathing, sometimes playing games or even distracting ourselves from something, using different forms of expression, maybe through arts or music or dance, or even conversation, or just having a brief one-on-one check-in. It might even be something like getting a cup of tea and taking a 5-minute break or a step outside that can just help to re-regulate a bit, so that then we can continue in our work in a clearer, more thoughtful way.
And these pictures make it look like our trainings are all fun and games, and I believe they are joyful, but we're very intentional about the activities we use, and we always link them to the learning objectives. And we'll talk about this more. But by helping people regulate and be in the green zone, they're more open to learning and they're more open to each other, which creates a sense of safety and deepens the learning.
So just briefly, for example, Anita and I were giving a training recently in an environment where there was a lot of ongoing stress and trauma and a lot of conflict and violence. And one of the groups that we were training was a group of police officers. And when we started the training, there was a woman, I'm going to change her name and call her Mary, but there was a woman police officer in our training group who came in at the first day, and her face was just totally flat. She was very shut down. She kind of had no expression. And when we started the training on that first day, within probably the first like 5 to 10 minutes, she started dozing off. And for a good part of day one, she was pretty much asleep, I guess I would say, kind of coming, opening her eyes back and forth. She looked very stressed, very heavy, and very burdened. And I think, had we used kind of a more traditional style of training or engaging, where maybe if we had used a lot of lecture and PowerPoint and things, I think she would have kind of remained very off and shut down throughout the whole training. But in this case, we did a lot of interactive kind of activities, a lot of things where people were up and moving around and participating. And throughout the course of this, we really saw Mary totally come to life. She completely transformed. And by the end of this training, she was one of our most vocal people who was actually leading activities, sharing a lot about her own personal and professional experiences, and was really starting to provide leadership amongst the other participants. So it's just an example of how integrating some of these things can really change the way that people are learning and taking in information, especially when there's a lot of stress going on. The other thing that I want to mention, it has to do with our own self-care. Because, again, if no matter what we're doing with other people, if we are not kind of feeling okay and balanced and taking good care of ourselves, we're not going to be able to support others in a good way. And I know most all of you are really working hard in your work to support a lot of other people. And so I just want to ask you to think about, for a moment, to think about a time when you felt stressed or frustrated or overwhelmed. Maybe you started going into the red or the blue levels yourself. And I just want you to think, is there anything that you did to try and help take care of yourself? Is there anything that you did to help yourself feel better and to get back into the green? if anybody very briefly would like to just to type in or raise your hand and type in just a couple brief comments of anything that you have done that kind of helps you when you start to get too high or too low. What helps you to get back into that green level? The second thing that I would ask you to think about is there anything sometimes that as a professional, as a staff person, is there any things that you do to support your staff or your teams or the kids or families that you're working with to support them in their own well-being? Great, I see some good responses on here that sometimes people go swimming, have gone to counseling, someone wears workout clothes and goes for a long run or walk. Great. Fantastic, exercise is super. Someone says connecting with friends or family at home or having beers with colleagues or friends at the duty station after work. Fantastic. I mean, these are all, so we're talking about connecting with other people, socializing, exercising, actually seeking, additional help or support, even sometimes professional support. These are fantastic. And you might just want to think about, again, are there things, so there's good things that you're saying that you do for yourself, and then just to think about what are the things that you might do in your work setting to support the people that you are working with. And sometimes, especially when you're in a really stressed environment, there's a lack of resources, sometimes it's not even safe enough to go outside for that walk. There's no swimming pool, of course. It's extremely hot. How can you still support people to come up with some different ideas and use some of those good kind of strategies to help with good self-care and regulation? So we'll put that out there as just some kind of food for thought for now. And in addition to that, or to expand on that, the Alliance for Global Protection Cluster has actually prepared a really wonderful training module on self-care. And this will be something that Joanna will attach in the follow-up email after the webinar. So again, this is another lovely resource that you all can have access to.
We thank you for your patience and realize we're going a bit over, but we're going to quickly just now give an overview of some of the core concepts and the processes that we use within our training. And the first one we really focus on is safety. And when people first think of safety, often people think of physical safety. And it's true, people need to be physically safe in order to best learn. But we also focus a lot on emotional safety. And this links to what Ilya was saying about the thinking brain and the survival brain. If people are in the survival brain, they can't learn well. So some of the concepts we focus on are really quite basic. We work so that people feel seen and heard and that they feel important. And it seems so simple, but so often those things are missing from trainings. So some of the things we do, we actively welcome each person who comes in to the room. We also have different activities, in particular activities that get the thinking brain engaged. In a few slides, you'll see some examples of the mind puzzles that we use. We're also very mindful of the seating and how people interact with each other, and we connect people with each other. And some of the common activities that are often used in the trainings also to create safety are having a group agreement, agreeing as a group how the workshop will proceed, but also enforcing those group agreements, which are often lacking. We have a notice board, which is just a blank piece of paper, hopefully taped up to the wall, if there is a wall, where people can ask questions. We also focus a lot on games and different activities. People in and know that they belong to the group. Sometimes there are official roles, such as team leaders and timekeepers, but also it's just about focusing that they are part of this learning community. And that goes into the next concept of connection. For me, I believe learning is connection. It's about connection to the self and learning about who I am, and as Ilya just spoke about regulation, recognizing how this information is important to me and how I'm interacting with it. It's also about connecting to each other and being part of a learning community and figuring out how you can help others to learn. One of the connecting activities we do are these little, they're kind of blurred in the picture, but they're bean bags that we use to throw back and forth through a really fun game that we use in the first few days of the training. During our last training in South Sudan, there was a time when I needed to step into a different training, and I hadn't yet been with those people before. So even though it was midway through the training, I asked them what they wanted to do, and they wanted to play the bean bags. So we spent a lot of time playing bean bags, and the interpreter said, well, come on, let's get on with the training. But I knew that since I was an outsider to that group, I had to spend a lot of time creating safety and connection before we could get on to the content of the training. Great. Another concept that we focus on is identity, and for some reason it's good, identity. So it's really about creating an identity as a learner, and this goes back to what we were talking about from the popular education model. I often start my training saying, I am here to learn from you. That doesn't mean I don't have anything to teach, but it means that my mind is open and I want to hear about people's experiences and then match that with the information and the support that they need to move forward. So in the top left picture, you can see there are colored pieces of paper, which is called tanagrams, and it's a Chinese puzzle, and we often use that as a welcome activity. And then on the right-hand side, it's also a bit hard to see, but they're toothpicks. So there are a lot of mind puzzles that people can use. And once again, this is about engaging the thinking brain. So helping people shift from that chaotic environment that they may have had a stressful morning, or maybe they have lots of stuff to do at work, and trying to find that calm amidst the chaos, switching them to the thinking brain so that they can learn better and use the information.
I just want to give a brief example here, because I think for those of you that are working in child protection, one of the things I think that we see quite often is that people start to, because of the amount of kind of stress and challenges that people are dealing with, that people might start to really view themselves and see themselves as victims or as helpless, or there's nothing I can really do to change my circumstances or to really make things better, and start to feel like I need other people to solve the problem for me. So sometimes that starts to become almost like kind of part of the feeling of identity. It becomes part of like who I am. I am somebody that is not really valued. I'm not really, I don't really have a lot of worth. I'm not seen as powerful, or that I can really make a difference. And so that's one of the things that we have to kind of work with and gently kind of challenge and support a transformation around. I was working once with a young woman who was about 20 years old. I'll call her Sarah. But she was on a refugee status in Eastern Africa, and because of that didn't have any kind of legal rights to work or these kinds of things. And she was quite young, but she was very religious. She was Muslim, and very she wasn't married, and so she was very proud for most of her life about the fact that she was a virgin, and and you know, that she wouldn't be having any relations until marriage and things. I'm sharing this because at one point during her whole kind of refugee experience, she experienced violence and sexual assault and became pregnant. And when this happened, the place that she relocated to, other people even in the community started to even call her names, and really she was shunned by the community. They started to call her a prostitute and saw her in a very negative way. And this whole experience really started to change the whole sense of identity that this young woman had about herself, how she viewed herself. And when we finally met with her, she was, you know, in a very, very low state. The point is that in working with her through a variety of different things, over time, she was able to get different types of support. Her and her child were involved in with the child protection system. She started working with a trauma counselor. She began working with a livelihood program that was working on women's empowerment. And through all of this, it really shifted her whole view of herself to the point to where she no longer started to see herself as somebody that didn't deserve anything and somebody that was bad and evil. But who started, where she started to see herself now as someone who was capable and competent, and she actually started to even facilitate even some support sessions for other young women who had also experienced gender-based violence and were having a hard time connecting with their children. So really transformed into a leadership role. And so again, I think this is what many of you are doing in your work, but it directly ties to this whole concept of identity. We're going to skip that one. Mm-hmm. And the final thing that we're going to talk about is just related to empowerment. And the story that I just told, you know, there were a number of things, of different types of support and activities that Sarah was able to engage in that helped her to really begin to feel re-empowered and to start to feel her energy and her coming back to life and her feeling of competency, and that she could really do something to improve her life and the life of her child and even make a difference in her community. This again is one of the things that really gets affected by stress and also really impacts our ability to learn and be creative and take new kinds of action to change our environment. Go ahead, Anita.
No, good. And that's the goal, right? We want people in learning environments to utilize that information to change their lives for the better. So we realized, particularly the last part of the webinar was a little quick, but we just wanted to give a brief summary of some of the concepts that we covered. And you are welcome to contact us for more information, as well as you'll get the PowerPoints and some follow-up documents. So we talked about popular education and how we can create wisdom and both be teachers and learners. We talked about compounded stress and the effect of the thinking brain and the survival brain. We also focused on self-care, and I encourage you once again to look at that toolkit that Joanna will send. The core concepts of safety, regulation, connection, identity, and empowerment are very critical to ensuring that people can be engaged in these learning environments, whether that's training or other learning opportunities. And I wanted to give you a little bit more theory. We wanted to give you a lot more theory, but due to time and technical malfunctions, we weren't able to do that. But one of the theories that we used, even in this training, is about the learning cycle, which we simplified a bit. So people have experiences, and then they reflect on them. Then they create theories or learn, and then they apply. So this is a cycle that we also use throughout our trainings and help people process. But the way that I like to do that is through the head, heart, and feet, although I only wrote one foot, so maybe it's head, heart, and foot. So to help people process, what are some of the things that they learned, or what questions do they have? What are some feelings that came up? And what are you going to do with the information? So in closing, I would like to ask you those same questions. What was helpful or new information? Did any thoughts or feelings or emotions come up? And how are you going to use this information?
To take action.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I think those are some of our kind of closing questions for you all to think about. We could take a few typed in responses to those if some people are able to share any of your thoughts or feelings or ideas. And then also we would like to just take just a few moments for any additional questions that any of you have. Joanna, I think you can take it then from there.
Yeah. First of all, I wanted to check that you can hear me. Can you hear me at the moment?
Yes. You can.
Okay, great. So that means that I can hopefully unmute microphones. If anyone has a question they would like to ask, you can raise your hand, and you can have a question to each other or particular to Anita and Ilya. Or if you'd like to just put in a suggestion, you could, again, you could speak it and I could unmute your microphone, or you could put it into the question box if it's either a question or a comment that you'd like to share, or maybe something in terms of the question that Ilya and Anita have put to you about your head, your heart, your foot. Maybe while we wait for either of those, because I don't see anyone right now. Oh, Safi has put up his hand. Safi, Ola, go ahead.
Thanks for the very important and very attractive presentation. Just I wanted to have your idea, because my understanding is that the stress should be divided into two. For example, into professional work and also on the personal life. So, do you think if we keep it separate and do not mix it in order to overload the person, so do you think that strategy will be effective to avoid further stress?
Yeah, for us, I think our view and approach is that we're a whole person, right? So although we all have kind of our personal life and then we have our professional life, the stress that we experience can really affect any aspect of ourself, right? So I think any of us can think about any time that we might have had some significant personal stress going on, that there's probably a lot of ways in which that has carried over into some of our work, or into our interactions with people, for example. I know that has been the case for myself. And so I think, in our work, we usually try to acknowledge that we are not just totally fragmented, compartmentalized people, but that we are whole people who have all these different kinds of roles and experiences in our life. And they're not, just totally separate from one another. So I would say that in our experience, it tends to be more helpful, to really think about within my life, as a whole, both my personal life, my professional life, and within the different roles that I carry. How am I doing? How am I feeling? Am I feeling joyful and competent and empowered and creative, or am I feeling stressed and depleted and frustrated? And what are the things that I need to help myself? And likewise, what are the things that the people that I'm working with, what are things that they might need to receive better support? Do you want to add anything?
No.
No, I think that, I hope that answers some of your question.
So there's a couple more comments. One maybe related to what you've just said. Maury says that emotional safety is still a concept that is yet to be picked up on in my part of the world. So often we don't think about its importance in our work, perhaps because we've been conditioned in our learning or intake of information.
Yeah,
and then
that's,
sorry.
oops, I was just going to comment briefly on that, Joanna, that I think we find that a lot as well. Anita and I do in our work, where, like she said, a lot of times we're really focused on physical safety. But, you know, for one, sometimes we are working in environments where physical, like total physical safety is just not even a possibility or reality, right? It's just not the case right now, unfortunately. And so we have to figure out how to create as much of a feeling of security as possible, even when the external environment might not actually be completely safe. And likewise, the flip side of that is sometimes we are in a very kind of safe and secure environment, but we may feel internally, I might not feel comfortable. I might not feel secure within myself. I might not trust the other people that are, you know, that are around me. And so even though, you know, it looks like everything should feel okay, but for various reasons, I might not feel that inside myself. And so I think that that's something that we have to really be paying attention to, both in ourselves and also, again, in the kids and families that we're supporting.
And the same also goes for self-care. When we introduce the concepts of self-care in our training, some people, it's too far out of reach. They say, we don't have time for ourselves. We're too busy playing all these other different roles. But we're very intentional about modeling our practices during the training. So we talk about emotional safety when we're having deep discussions. When I talked about the bean bags and why it was important to create connection, it was because the topic that day was about victimization and aggression. And I knew I couldn't get to that deeper level without creating that emotional safety. So we reflect on the experiences even during the trainings. And over the course of the trainings, people slowly understand the importance of both emotional safety and self-care.
Great, thank you. I think we have time for one last question. Karen raised the issue of what about challenges and tips for overcoming challenges when training people of different cultures who may be stressed. And I'd like to take this back in particular to your idea of emotional regulation. You know, working cross-culturally, how people show their emotions is different, and therefore a bit of a challenge maybe if we're coming from outside that community.
Yeah. So I think, you know, and Anita and I have, and I think probably most of you on the call, you know, are working in very much cross-culturally, and in a lot of different environments with people from a variety of different backgrounds and values and religions and ages and everything. So I think, you know, there are some important things to maybe keep in mind, or that we try to keep in mind. One of those is about trying not to make a whole lot of assumptions. So, like, trying not to assume what people's experiences are, or what people are good at or not good at, or what they find stressful, or but to really ask and ask a lot, and allow time and space for people to really give their ideas and share their experiences and their thoughts and feelings. And Joanna, when you related this like to emotional regulation, for example, you know, Anita and I we might kind of talk about some of these concepts, and then we might say, well, so, you know, like we did here in this training, what do you do? How do you do that when you start to go to the red level, for example, and you are feeling, you know, really angry and you just want to, you know, hit something? What do you do? What can you do to help yourself, right? Because what I do might be very different from what someone else does, right? But that's okay. All of that is okay. So, you know, so I think part of it is just creating a lot of space and room for people to feel comfortable. And again, this comes back to safety and feeling secure and respected, for people to feel that, wow, there really is a space here where I can share my own experiences and ideas, and I'm not going to just be judged or feel that I'm wrong. That's just some initial comments maybe. But it's a wonderful question that could actually, you know, that we could spend a whole day talking about, or a whole year talking about.
We could have another session on that one, couldn't we?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, time's coming to an end, so we do need to hold that answer at least there, but I do appreciate both the question and the answer. Thank you both, or thank you all. You know, I have to say that as we wrap up this session, I just wanted to reflect on how well you've demonstrated by drawing us in from our busy lives. Yes, people took the time to do this, but I know that there are phone calls and people working into offices and emails coming up and so on, and how you drew us in by telling us stories, by showing us photos, by giving us tips, by posing questions, by answering questions, by trying to be as interactive as possible, even with the limits of technology and then the failures of technology. So I really wanted to thank you both, Anita and Ilya, for your time, your expertise, your flexibility, and by showing us, by doing it for us. I think that's really wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you as well, Joanna, and to the Alliance for this opportunity. We appreciate it so much. And also to everyone who's taken the time to be with us on this call. We're very grateful for all of you and for your time. And like Anita said, we would be very happy to follow up with anyone at a later time if there's more kind of questions or comments that anyone has. So
great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes. We'll share your PowerPoint as well as your contact details in a follow-up email. So I also wanted to thank Jed Gorlock of Plan International, who's been helping with the logistics. A recording of this session will be on the Alliance website. So do send people who might be interested there by the end of the month, or you can check back in yourself if you want to recapture part of this. So in closing, thank you so much for sharing part of your day with us, as well as your questions and your experiences. We hope that we'll have that pleasure again soon. And until then, I wish you the very best, and I hope our paths meet soon. Bye for now.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.